journey. I know some have traveled very far. We appreciate it and thank you for your encouragement and your words of support. We are going to begin with some music.
Danger, into both his precious blood. Obrigada por o carinho todo que estas pessoas têm demonstrado por nós. A nossa avó era uma pessoa espetacular, muito querida e muito nossa amiga. Agradeço por tudo. Muito obrigada. Amém.
Amen.
It's very appropriate that some of the service should be in Portuguese because, after all, Mum was Portuguese and lived all but the last 9 years of her life in that beautiful country, which I kind of wished we lived there as well. 98 years, almost a century, and I've known her, not quite half of that, I've known her just over 40 years, because just over 40 years ago, this young lady at the front here, Louisa, as part of her scheming, invited me to her grandma's house for Christmas Eve. And that's where I met her grandma and her mother, and the older ones that are sitting here, not all the grandchildren. But I met a lot of family. And because of Portuguese hospitality, I met a lot of food. And her mother and her grandmother were very concerned for this very shy, very skinny English boy who didn't eat meat. And despite the fact that Louisa had brought a vegetarian roast for me, that was not good enough. And so they spent the entire evening up till about midnight fattening me up with countless slices of every variety of Portuguese cake that is imaginable. But it was a sign to me, not that I should marry Louisa, although that came, but it was a sign to me of the hospitality in the Barros family. And as Louisa and I got closer together, I saw something very special in her mother. Sometimes some very strange and funny things with her mother, because after we were married and Stephen came along and we made our first visit to Portugal to show off the grandchild to Mum, and we're staying in her house, in her flat, it's a downstairs basement apartment, and you've got a baby, you have to do washing, and when you've got the washing you need to hang it out, and being an Englishman I just took the washing out of the machine and went to hang it on the line, and I suddenly found a hand on the scruff of my neck pulling me back in, because Mum was a very traditional Portuguese woman who did things correctly, and a man should not be hanging out washing, and definitely the neighbours shouldn't see it. And, I thought I was going onto a good thing there, but Louisa took after her dad. Maria Manuela Dores, Pinto, Ribeiro, Barros. Wonderful name, isn't it? Born on the 7th of October 1921 in Lisbon, Portugal. Her dad was a retired army officer. He'd been injured in the First World War, and because of that could no longer serve in an active capacity. But he was a fantastic musician, and one of the reasons you heard violin music as we came in, that was one of the pieces that he loved to play. And so it was a very musical family, and he was, like his father, a conductor in a military band, and because of that they moved around the country. So while she was born in Lisbon, she lived all over the place. She had 4 siblings: Tio Manuel, who sadly died fairly early, and then Tia Juca, Tia Constanza, and Tia Louisa, all of whom I met and loved. And as the oldest daughter, she took responsibility to look after particularly the 2 youngest siblings. So as a 15-year-old, she was looking after her baby sisters. So she took that responsibility quite early. She only had primary school education, but that did not stop her being a very, very talented and clever lady who could turn her hand to anything. And you saw her embroidery or her knitting or the other things that she did. Her cooking, I can testify to. Her homemade soups, they're to be sought after. I'm very glad that her youngest daughter, Nella, has followed in her footsteps, and every time she comes to visit, I know I'm safe for soup for a fortnight. It's marvellous. She was a very good gardener as well, and she enjoyed it, and even when she lived in that ground floor flat, there were pots all down the outside where she was constantly growing things, and it was great. She was a very kind person, and she would do anything for anybody. And she actually started caring for people again when she was very young. As a teenager, she used to go and visit the elderly that were shut in their houses and were maybe not getting the level of care that it would have been nice for them to have. And she would go in, as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, and she would cook for them, and she would change their beds, and she would clean the house, and her dad would say, "Why on earth are you doing this?" But it was her personality. She just had that kind of love in her that she wanted to help and do things for other people. Because of her dad's musical background, the house was actually very lively. And it was an artistic household, and there'd be lots of parties and lots of plays, and Manuela was very involved in all of that. She also liked to make things to sell, knitting and embroidery particularly, and she loved life. I don't know where her love for dancing came from, but that went through, and there was just a joy with her. And those of you here, the English part of the family, you know very well that although there was difficulties in language between her Portuguese and our English, it was no barrier. She just kind of spoke to everybody. It was the same for the carers as they came to visit, and some of the carers I know were very nervous, and they told me the first time they came to visit, because it said on the instructions, speaks Portuguese, and they didn't. But it didn't matter. And Moira was sitting back there as well, who very kindly looked after Mum for a long time from the Catholic Church, because Mum was Catholic, she grew up Catholic, and Moira would come every week and share communion with Mum, and Moira would do it in English, and when you got to Pai Nossa, the Lord's Prayer, they would say it together in two languages, and it was actually lovely to watch. She didn't have these kinds of barriers. She enjoyed getting involved in life. I just sent Daniel. Daniel's here videoing this, but he's like another son for our family. And I sent him a lovely photo last week of Daniel dancing with Mum, and it's a very emotional photo. It's lovely. She just enjoyed life. Well, when she was living in the north of Portugal, in Vila de Cunha, and I probably pronounced that wrong, she met a young man called Antonio, and he was one of 10 brothers. Can you imagine? And they were all very shy. And maybe this was practice for Louisa when she met me, because it seems that the outgoing Barroses seem to manage to connect with shy men and manage to marry them. And so she got to know Antonio, and she used to tease the brothers, because there was one of the brothers that was very, very shy, and was so shy that if Manuela came in the front gate, he would go out the back door. And so there was certainly at least one occasion where she came to the front gate and then ran around the back to meet him coming out the back door. She had that kind of sense of humour, which was wonderful as well. So they fell in love. They married back in Lisbon, although they then lived in the north of Portugal. They had 3 children that are all here. Their official proper names are in the programme, but apart from Louisa, the other 2 get abbreviated. So we have Lena as the oldest one, and Nella as the youngest one, and Louisa's the piggy in the middle. And so there are 3 of them, and then in later years you can add to that 8 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren. And she loved every one of them. There was no better joy. When she moved to England, she had the photo album of all of you from Portugal, and she was always looking through it. And then she would say to Louisa, I need to talk to them, and so we would phone and she would talk, and it was great. Dad went to Africa in about 1961. He worked as an engineer in Mozambique, in South Africa, and Rhodesia, as it was then known, now Zimbabwe. It took him 18 years to come home. And you can imagine that that was a difficult time for Mum, because in effect she was then a single parent. And it was a difficult time for the girls, who missed Dad incredibly as well. And even we found some letters that they wrote to Dad during that time he was in Africa, saying, please come home because we're missing you. And Mum managed. She got through it. She moved back to Lisbon to be with her mother, and she was reliant on money from Africa, and sometimes that money came and sometimes it didn't. And when it didn't, because Mum was that caring, loving kind of person, the shopkeepers knew her, and they would say, okay, we know you haven't got the money now, when you've got it, then you come and give it to us. We know that we can trust you. So there were years of struggle, but her hard work and her generous spirit saw her through. And the girls always looked very neat and presentable when they went to school, because she was a good seamstress, and she made sure that even though they hadn't got much money, everybody looked good. The theory was that the family would follow Dad to Africa, but that never happened. And after 18 years of separation, in what I actually see as an incredible act of grace and love, Dad came home and Mum accepted him back into the family, more than accepted him, you could say. She never stopped loving him. And she had an unconditional love that could be seen as they lived happily together until the day he died 16 years ago, aged 80. That love could be seen in the last months of her life here in England, because she had a photo of Dad by her bed. And when you went up in the bedroom, and especially if she didn't know you were coming, you would see her there just holding that photo in both her hands and kissing it almost to the point of destruction, because she loved him so much. It was an unconditional love. Manuela was 82 when Dad died, and continued to live on her own until she was almost 90. And those of you from Portugal know very well that in this downstairs flat, she actually, rather than having to go up the stairs and go out the front door, she actually used to climb out the kitchen window. And she was still doing that at that incredible age. It was really amazing. And her youngest daughter Nella would visit her for extended periods every weekend. She was also surrounded by wonderful neighbours, because they all fell in love with her, and they would keep a very good eye on her. But as her health deteriorated, she needed more care, and we were the ones our children were getting married, so we had a spare bedroom. And she made that very courageous choice at almost 90 years old to change country and come and live in cold and miserable England, but with her family. She was deeply loved by all the Portuguese family, and that soon extended to all the English family as well, and to our neighbours, because Mum had that ability to talk without the need for translation. And she used to entertain our neighbours. We used to get scared because she liked to go out for little walks by herself. And what do you do with a 90-year-old who's out walking by herself and no ability to speak English? And so Louisa made a name tag for her and hung it around her neck with our address on it. And our neighbours were highly amused by Mum walking around the block with this little name tag. It also means she got some wonderful holidays, exploring parts of the UK and telling us that she'd actually seen more of England than she'd seen of Portugal. But as we said earlier, she lived for family. And being in our house, she took absolute great delight in both the grandchildren And then over the past 5 years, the great-grandchildren, two of which you saw today. The other one decided to celebrate this week with chicken pox, and so we decided not to infect you with her presence. But there are lots of pictures for her to see, and that's another reason why Daniel is standing there, both for her and for the Portuguese family. Nothing brought her greater joy than interacting with the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. I know one of Jenna's special memories is one of those Christmases, and I think it was a Christmas where we had everybody there, including Obed, your family. I think we were all, I don't know how we all got in the house, which is probably why Jenna and her part of the family were sitting on the stairs and playing, what was it? Ukulele, playing a ukulele, and they dragged Mum, Grandma, Avor out there and started singing to her Feliz Navidad, and Mum was, I think you were dancing, and there was a bit of a party going on there in the hallway. Mum thought it was hilarious. She collapsed with laughter with it. Nothing brought her greater joy than in the last 5 years playing with Ava and Emily and Erin, the great-grandchildren on this side. She had more great-grandchildren over on your side, which she loved the photos of and the occasional Skype conversations, and that was wonderful. She adored those great-grandchildren to the extent that when we weren't looking, she had this supply of biscuits and sweets by her chair or her bed, and it's amazing how fast those went down when the great-grandchildren came to visit. It wasn't just the great-grandchildren. You see 3 dogs there in front of her that the great-grandchildren decorated, and that's because Mum also loved our 2 dogs. So these were decorated in her honour. Our dogs are now losing weight because she was constantly throwing scraps of food. And in fact, I caught her because in the last months of her life, when she could no longer come downstairs, but even before that, we had a camera just to make sure she was safe. And so there was a camera in her bedroom, and I would be sitting downstairs, and the camera would be, I could look on my phone and see she was all right. And I would see, in particularly, Kira, who is a black dog, so she would appear just as a shadow, sneaking into the bedroom. And Mum, she was living on tea and toast. That's all she wanted by that time. And it's amazing how that toast went. And looking on the camera, we would see where it went, because she would just be reaching out with her one arm and feeling for the toast, and then somehow the toast went that way, and the dog stayed until there was no more toast to throw, and then she would ring her bell or knock and say, "Ten your form, I'm hungry," and then we would have to make some more toast so the dogs could continue to be fed. But it made her happy, and the dogs are now getting healthier again. She lived with her memories, almost 100 years of them, and loved to tell the stories of her past, and would ask Louisa, "Please, I want to talk to my sisters or my daughters," and the evening would be spent on phone calls. And for us, she was simply a lesson of love, unconditional, all-giving. And even in the last weeks of her life, when she would tell us that she was praying for God on our behalf, and she would always greet me with a massive smile when I came home from work, and particularly if I'd been away on one of my trips, and that smile got bigger and bigger when visits came from Portugal, and it was fantastic that all 3 of her daughters could be here just recently for her 98th birthday, and she could have a celebration together with them, and that's a photo that you see in the programme there. Really, Lena and Louisa and Nella, they couldn't have asked for a better mother. I couldn't have asked for a better mother-in-law. The children couldn't have asked for a better grandma or great-grandma. And today we really simply just want to thank God for the life of Donna, Manuela, my Avor, aunties or a vovó, whatever you call her. We just thank God for her.
Thank you very much, Victor, for sharing those lovely memories without getting too emotional. It was his responsibility to remind us a little bit, or to share with us, about Maria Manuela, Dores, Pinto, Ribeiro, and Barros, or otherwise known as Vovo, for the little ones. My role here today is to speak very briefly about the faith she had. Clever people have made a very unusual discovery not that long ago. They discovered mirror neurons. Without going into too much details, these mirror neurons, I'm quoting from the clever folk, activate in the same way when you're watching someone else do something as they do when you are doing it yourself. Your brain fires up in exactly the same way. And it is because of this mirroring ability that is thought we have the opportunity to influence one another. So for example, spend time with a nervous and anxious person and you will discover that you are going to mirror that. Conversely, spend time with people who are full of hope and have a positive attitude towards life and the things of life, and you will mirror that as well. So it is for this reason that everybody you refer to, whether it was neighbors who shared a common language or not, whether it was people she was familiar with or not, they were able to enjoy and appreciate her company. They were mirroring something in her that she naturally possessed. She was a warm woman, dedicated, industrious, kind, committed. However, from listening to stories today and before, there was one thing that she carried with her wherever she went, and that was her faith. She was dedicated to her God. Her faith in God never left her, as it were. So whether it was that she was mirroring the faith of those around her, or whether it was that those around her mirrored her faith, or whether it was a mixture of both, wherever she was, that is my understanding, one thing was for sure, there was a regular, committed and deep connection with God that she had. And as a result of it, her and those around her were closer to God. She knew God, and others got to know her God through her. Now the Bible refers to those who follow the Lord Jesus as being ambassadors. They are representatives of God here on earth, and that's an awesome responsibility. Saying mirror neurons. If the God you worship is kind and loving, and those mirror neurons function properly, then we ought to mirror it nicely. Conversely, if you look at somebody and they're ugly and nasty, it makes you wonder what kind of a God they worship. But from what you were telling us, she was a loving, kind, hospitable woman. Which tells me the God she worshipped was just the same. And I like that. Graham Scroggie, he was a famous pastor in Edinburgh, Scotland, almost 70 years ago. He was fond of telling the story of a small boy in London who wanted to meet the Queen. The little boy often passed by the gates of Buckingham Palace in hopes to see the Queen. But he never caught sight of her. One day he went up to the gate and tried to go in, but the guard would not let him in. So he watched as the guard marched back and forth. And when the guard was at the far end of the gate, the little boy ran to the gate and tried to squeeze between the bars. In a flash, the guard was on him and grabbed him. The small fellow pleaded, "But I just want to meet the Queen." The guard spoke very sternly to him and told him, "Go away, the Queen did not have time for little boys." Dejected, the wee lad turned and left. Just around the corner, he sat on the curb and cried. Now, before long, the young man came by and asked him what was wrong. He looked up at the young man and told these stories. "All I wanted to do was meet the Queen, but that mean man at the gate won't let me in." The man took the little boy by the hand and said, "Come with me." Together, the story goes, they walked around the corner and up to the gate. This time, the guard opened the gate and they walked right past the guard and into the palace. The young man told the little boy to wait for a moment, and very soon after, the queen appeared. She sat and chatted with him over tea and cookies. Before long, it was time for him to leave, and the queen offered him a cookie to go. Oh, how that little boy felt so big when he walked through the gate and past the guard. It turns out that the young man who took the boy by the hand was the queen's son. And Graham Strogi, the preacher, liked to say, "I know that story is true because I was that little boy." On the one hand, Vovo was that person who brought people closer to God. On the other hand, other people kept bringing her close to God. Whether it was Victor and Luisa who live out their faith in every possible way, whether it was the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren who enjoyed worshipping together and she loved the music, whether it was her friends who visited regularly and enjoyed talking together about God. One such close friend was Moira, who faithfully visited each week to give a mass, even though they did not have that common language. That is phenomenal. Somehow there was a God connection. Somehow they kept each other into the presence of God. And it is this common faith in a loving, always open arms, welcoming, hospitable God which keeps this family together at this difficult time. They're grieving, but not like people without hope. For they take the Bible to be true when it speaks of a time when those who fall asleep in the Lord will share forever with Him. This is how the Bible describes that reality. Somebody caught a glimpse of it and it says, "I saw heaven and earth newly created. Gone the first heaven, gone the first earth, gone the sea. I saw this city, Jerusalem, newly created, descending resplendent out of heaven as ready for God as a bride for her husband. I heard a voice from the throne. Look, look! God has moved into the neighborhood, making His home with man and woman. They're His people. He's their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death is gone for good. Tears gone, crying gone, pain gone. All the first order of things gone." The one who was seated continued, "Look, I'm making everything new. Write it down. Each word dependable and accurate." Vovo and her family lived out this reality of God in the neighborhood. Every day, you as a family, granny, great-grandma, mom, you mirror the conviction of generations of Christians, God followers, who throughout the years took Jesus' words seriously. "I will go to prepare a place for you, but take courage. I'll not leave you alone. My Spirit will comfort you." So friends, today we're laying to rest a mother, a wife, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, and a friend whom we know one day will see the King. So may we today allow that strong belief she had that soon and very soon we will see the King. May that belief strengthen us as we grieve together. May we commit today to get to know this God that she mirrored so nicely, because life with Him is much, much more meaningful than without Him. And may we today, by living out our faith, give others an opportunity to mirror it. That is my prayer. In order to say our goodbye, I would like to invite you all to stand, please, for prayer and for the formal communion. This is my prayer today. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make His face shine upon you be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen. For as much as God in his infinite love and wisdom has permitted our dear sister to fall asleep in Christ, we do tenderly commit her body to rest, in the sure and certain hope of a joyful resurrection when our Lord